Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Ladies and gentlemen, we are sitting here with one of the finest people to ever put on a pair of tap shoes, Mr. Sam Weber. Thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Give us a little bit of a backstory. How did you come to be a tap dancer? What was your first?
You know, when I was a kid, it wasn't so unusual for people to give kids tap lessons. A lot of my friends took tap lessons. They just didn't stay with it. So when I was 3, my parents gave me tap lessons. And first I went to a recreation center in our neighborhood. And the interesting thing about my parents is that, you know, for some parents they would just want to give their kids tap lessons just to keep them busy, just to get them out of their hair or something. But my parents always wanted me to have good training if I was going to have training in something. Mm-hmm. So they were looking around for a good teacher. And I can remember actually coming from this recreation center when I was 3, and my mom saying something like, "Well, I don't think we're going to go back there," you know. And I think we went to a couple of other places too, which I don't remember much about. But finally, we found Fred Nathan, who was my first teacher when I was 4 years old. And after about, I don't know, a month, I really loved tap dancing. I just was hooked. And then I studied with him till I was 10, and we moved to the West Coast, where we found Stan Kahn, who was probably the greatest tap teacher in the world at that time. It was because my teacher incorporated a lot of ballet into the tap, so that what he wanted to do was to give somebody what they would have learned in a ballet class even if they didn't take ballet, and through the tap, you know, even though he wanted me to take ballet class as well. So actually, even before I began to study ballet seriously, people would often say to me, "I can see you've had a lot of ballet training," you know, when I really hadn't had any. And I would always go, "Oh, yeah, you know." When I was about 13, I began to realize that I could actually dance as a career. I hadn't even thought about that before. It was just something I liked to do. When I realized that, I knew I was going to need ballet. So then I started taking it. Then I actually began to like it.
What made you realize that you could be a dancer?
Well, I suppose I should have realized it sooner, you know, because so many other kids at the studio were focused on a career, you know, and I think my parents never really encouraged it because they were afraid, you know. They wanted me to get into something more serious, finish college, and all that kind of thing, which I later did, but. So they never even hinted that that might be a possibility, and so I just never thought of it. My relatives were, you know, like doctors, and you know, and that's what they would talk about, you know, some career like that. And so, yeah. And then one day I just went, "Hey, you know, look, everybody else is interested in doing this."
Cool.
And in those days, you know, I was in a musical with a company called LA Civic Light Opera, and in those days there wasn't any tap numbers in musicals. Tap was kind of passé, you know, and that even now there's not so much. Every musical doesn't have tap dancing. It's kind of rare, and but I always practiced on my own. Went to New York and got deeply into ballet. Was at the Joffrey School and danced with the Joffrey too, and you know, had my toe in the first company, but I actually didn't like being in New York. So, and I had already met who was the woman who was to be my wife, and so I moved back to the West Coast, and we were founding members of a company called Peninsula Ballet Theater. And then in my spare time, I would go and take class from Stan some more. Yeah, so I actually, you know, was learning from Stan until he died in 1994. I had hip surgery in 2008 and 9, I think. I was pretty, you know, free of any major problems until I was 38. And at 38, I had back surgery for a herniated disc. And that was the first thing. And that was very successful surgery. It was great, you know. Then, about 10 years later, I had a meniscus surgery on my left knee. And about 10 years after that, I had the hip replacement. So it seems like every 10 years, you know. And the hip thing started to come on probably 10 years before, very gradually. And at first I didn't know what it was, and I thought maybe I just needed to stretch more or something, and I would do that. And then it would escalate quickly. So I would go along at a certain level, and then it would get worse suddenly, go along at that level, get worse suddenly, go along at that level, until finally I started to get like really a sharp pain when I would hop or do something, you know. And that's when I went to the doctor, and they said, one doctor said to me, usually people with hips that look like yours are in wheelchairs. and he said, your blood must be so full of endorphins that somebody would get high from it, you know, because I was, so then I started thinking about surgery, and one doctor said, well, he said, you know, you'll know when you need it, when it gets so bad you can't stand it anymore. And most people gave me the advice that I should wait as long as possible before having it. Now that advice turned out to be not so great. I guess I have a high pain threshold or something, because I waited so long that there's this condition called necrosis of the bone, where the bone dies, the blood supply to the bone dies. Wow. If you wait that long, making an infection possible. So I actually got a bone infection, which means that they couldn't do a total hip replacement on the first surgery. They had to do this temporary thing where they didn't put in a liner because they had to make sure the infection was gone, big hassle. So that was, you know, disheartening to know that I was going to have that redone in a year after having it once. And the temporary thing was very uncomfortable. And so, and then I had, after I had that in October, in January I had the other side done, and that was a total hip normal. And a whole year later, from the first one, I had that redone. So it was a long recovery process. Even though I did go back to teaching, I didn't go back to performing until I'd had both of them done. And then, you know, slow, lots of physical therapy, and you know, at least it seems slow to me.
Did you always know that you would be able to dance after the surgery, or were there doubts, or how was that?
I wasn't sure, because you know, before I had the infection, I showed my doctor a video. I said, I want to be able to do this. I showed him a video of me, you know, and he said, yeah, you should be able to do that. So I felt good about that. But you know, after the infection, nobody could really tell me anything. You know, I just focused on doing one step at a time, on doing the therapy, you know, and there was always physical therapy to do after each one. Just seeing what I could do, you know, and it did seem like I could teach after the first two surgeries. So I thought, well, okay, so maybe I won't perform, maybe I'll just teach, and that seemed to be okay. And yeah, and then after the last one, then seemed like I, you know, after about 6 months, I went to the Munich Tap Jam. I was here teaching, and I danced, and I thought, well, okay, you know, and so, yeah, I didn't really look that far ahead. I guess I never do.
Well, were you in Colorado in 1986?
Yes.
I've heard from a couple of people about the impact of this festival.
Well, that was huge for me, because that was when I was dancing with Sacramento Ballet, and I was a principal dancer and ballet master there, and had decided, you know, that it was, you know, going to be time for me to end my ballet career pretty soon. because I was 36, and at that age you start thinking about that, you know. And I had an opportunity to join the Jazz Tap Ensemble because Fred Strickler had left the company. So I went down to LA and auditioned and got into the company. They had a sort of a audition by invitation only, you know, just a few people, yeah. And the first place I had to go was the Colorado Festival, where Lynn was going to be teaching, and I was just going to be there to rehearse with them because we were going to work on new material. And while I was there, I got to take class with everybody. I got to take class with Steve Contos and Honey Coles, Eddie Brown, and that was great, you know. And then I saw the performances, and this was just, Gregory Hines was there. I mean, you know, yeah. Being with the Jazz Tap Ensemble was really my dream gig because, you know, the way we got to rehearse with musicians, then it was like it was great, you know. We used to say we wish we could get paid to rehearse, you know, the band, and being creative, being able to make stuff with the musicians, have arrangements made, and yeah, that was really, if I could have done that just full time, all the time, that would have been what I wanted to do. One thing that helped my approach to practice was ballet, not because not because I'm trying to incorporate ballet into tap, but just the way ballet is structured. I realized that there should be a structure like that, you know, to tap. So my own sort of technical exercises I do, and then another person who was very influential was Steve Condos. His rudiment exercises, I can really use those in my own way, you know, and so I use his rudiments warm up to actually start, you know, when I practice, and I do about a half an hour.
Do you have advice for young sloppy dancers that are coming up, or you know, youngish sloppy dancers, sloppy dancers, in terms of longevity and a healthy perspective?
Well, longevity, I mean, you know, good training, and that's really important, you know, working correctly, being careful about all the movements that you do and knowing exactly how you're doing them and not throwing yourself around. I see a lot of that. I see a lot of people, you know, you can be loud if you know what you're doing, but I see a lot of people who don't know what they're doing, and they're really, you know, I wonder what's going to happen to them in 10 years. Yeah, and as far as a career, it seems like there's more opportunities all the time.
Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, it was a pleasure.
I think we're going to have a part 2.
Okay.
But maybe in America.
Yeah.
Until then.
I'd love to.
Canada.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Cheers.
Thank you.